Today we're going to talk about rhythm and texture. And first off, we're going to talk about rhythm. So this is part one of rhythm and texture. Okay, kinesthetic empathy is a mental process in which the viewer consciously or unconsciously recreates or feels an action or motion he or she only observes. So we talked about this previously in illusion of motion, but we're going to talk about it again in rhythm because they have a lot of relationship, rhythm and motion. So in this piece that we see by Erwin Wurm, you can see that there's kind of this figure in this sweater that's struggling to kind of get out, and I don't know, you can kind of feel it, and so there's definitely kind of this feeling of motion or kind of wiggling back and forth or something like that. So kinesthetic empathy is the first thing we're going to talk about with rhythm. Also, just a note, rhythmic structures in visual art and design are often described in terms of both borrowed music vocabulary. So rhythm has a lot of relationship with sound, kind of like tone or feeling. But we're talking about it in a two-dimensional way, but it comes from a really audio music land. Okay, first off, rhythm. Rhythm is an element of design based on the repetition of recurrent motifs. So in this painting we see right here by Bridget Riley, there's this kind of flowing wave, or kind of like, it almost looks like a sheet blowing in the wind or something like that. And we get that feeling of motion through these kind of patterns, but then also the way that they kind of repeat in this off-kilter way. So there's this expected movement kind of going through the entire piece with color and form and shape. So yeah, rhythm. Okay, pattern. So non-objective pattern is a type of artwork with absolutely no reference to or representation of the natural world. The artwork is the reality. So in this piece by Erwin Raudel called Matrix 2, we see this room that has a bunch of hanging LED lights that are all strung about 1 foot away from each other in any direction. So I actually got to see this piece in person, and you can actually walk through it. And I thought I was in there for about 20 minutes, and it turns out I'd been in that room for about 2 hours because it was so mesmerizing. I'd never seen anything like it. It was this phenomena unto itself. And it did feel kind of lyrical, but it was just this simple pattern, this repeating of these LED lights, and it created these kind of geometric sequences as you moved throughout the space that was just really mesmerizing. Okay, shapes and repetition. So legato is a type of rhythm. It is a connecting or flowing rhythm. So in this piece, which is a photograph that we see over here of dune ridges at sunrise in Death Valley from 1976 by Bruce Brownbaum, we can see that there's kind of this undulating feeling when we look at these dunes and the way that they rise up and go down and the shadow that's created in that morning sun. It feels like you can almost see, or like kind of infinitely into that space, and it's very kind of calming and relaxing because there's this kind of flow or movement that's really natural throughout the space. Pattern and sequence, alternating rhythm. Alternating rhythm is a rhythm that consists of successive patterns in which the same element reappears in a regular order. The motifs alternate consistently with one another to produce a regular and anticipated sequence. So in this piece by Edna Andrada, called Interchange, we can see that there's these kind of cubes, and then there's these pink and red dots within them, and the pink and red dots alternate vertically as we kind of move throughout the piece, and it kind of, to me, almost feels like I can see them like cha-chaing or dancing or moving, or these little condos, but there's just a simple switch of those colors, and it really creates a feeling of movement. There's this anticipation of what's going on back and forth. This is also another example of alternating rhythm. So this is a piece by Sol LeWitt called 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And in it we can see that there's 1 cube on the left, and as we move to the right there's a much larger cube with 5 cubes across the side. So Sol LeWitt actually makes all these pieces that have to do with creating patterns that can be repeated. A lot of her artwork is just a sequence of numbers that then are created in the gallery, whether they're a drawing on the wall or a sculpture like this, but they have a lot to do with sequencing and pattern, and we can see that there's this alternating rhythm here. All right, pattern and sequence again. So this is another example of that. This is vibrating colors. So we've talked about this before when we talked about color. So vibrating colors are colors that creates a flickering effect at their border. The effect usually depends on equal value relationships and strong hue contrast. So in this piece over here by Anish Kapoor, Symphony for a Beloved Daughter, we see this giant kind of red-orange dot in the middle, and it's actually a very large sculpture that's framed by this kind of blue sky behind it. So orange and blue are actually complementary colors, but this, for me, this dot is, I can't tell if it's orange or if it's red or if it's red-orange or what it is, but it really creates this huge contrast with the kind of natural sky behind it. So that vibrating colors that we see between those pieces really creates this sort of sequence. My eyes kind of flick back and forth really quickly to find the relationship between them. Converging patterns. So this is an example of progressive rhythm. Progressive rhythm is a repetition of shape that changes in a regular pattern. So in this piece over here by Ed Ruscha called Goodyear Tires 6610 Laurel Canyon, North Hollywood, 1967, we see a parking lot that's photographed from way above, maybe from a plane. And in it we can see that there's a couple different patterns going on. The first pattern is the pattern that's created by the lines where the cars are supposed to park in the parking lot. But what makes this as a progressive rhythm is you can see that as the building, which is at the very top of the picture, as the parking spots get closer to the building, there's kind of a darker value shift to them, and that's because cars will naturally park closer to the shop that they're trying to go to so that we don't have to walk as far. Not cars, we park our cars as close to the shop as we can possibly get to. So the closer parking lots have the darker oil stains, which makes them kind of have this value shift. So at the bottom, it's a little bit lighter, and then it shifts to a darker value as we look at the piece. So progressive rhythm. So this is another type of progressive rhythm called inherent rhythm. And so what we see over here is there's this artichoke that's halved. And so there's kind of this little triangle that's made right in the middle that kind of grows from the middle outwards. As we look at this thing. So a lot of inherent rhythms or progressive rhythms that kind of change throughout the piece, we find in nature. So there's lots of growth that we can see in that. That's kind of a natural growth. So this piece over here by Louise Bourgeois called Partial Recall kind of recreates that growing effect that we saw in the artichoke, but this is not something that's found in nature. This is something that she created. So we see these kind of scalloped fences that start off small, and as they kind of move back into the piece, they get larger and larger as they go. And you can almost feel like they're shrinking or growing, or it's the beginning of a trail and we can see up into the mountains, or I don't know, there's just some sort of movement going on back and forth throughout the piece. So there's this progressive rhythm that's inherent to we can see the natural steps that the artist took to get there. All right, the most complex type of rhythm, contrasting rhythm. So this is an example of polyrhythmic, which is a complex pattern employing more than one rhythm or beat. So in this piece that we see over here called Meta Monumental Garage Sale from 2012, this was first held in 1970, but this is another iteration of it by Martha Rosler. It's actually a garage sale where you could really go in and buy actual pieces. So the whole kind of overarching theme to it is all these used objects that are grouped together, but within it there's all these kind of selections that are grouped even more specifically. So like the clothes are in one area, the couches are in one area, the posters are in another area, the lamps are in one area. So there is these kind of groupings, these patterns of things, but there's overall this kind of larger structure of what's going on. So this is a really kind of complex way to look at pattern and relationship between objects. All right.